This isn't the easiest video to make, and it's not because I can't tell you exactly why this does happen, where a man will be in a relationship and he'll cheat, but yet he'll stay in the relationship and even very much still fight for it. Because I'm going to be unveiling to you some of the deepest, darkest parts of male nature. And when I say the deepest, darkest parts, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, because believe it or not, very often the drive and ambition a man has to succeed, to become the best, to dominate, comes from the shadow side of the masculine. And actually, without heading into the whole dark triad of men, this part of a man that makes him capable can actually be very attractive. But there are some things about male nature that I think is very difficult for women to understand. And so I want to help you by unveiling this, which will very much explain the phenomenon of why a man will maybe cheat in a relationship instead of just leaving. And even with the possibility of it ending, he still fights for it. While we are more the same than different, men and women are different. And so there are certain realities of the opposite sex we can only ever sympathize with and not empathize with, because we will never know it ourselves. And I want to prefix this with, if you want to truly understand why this particular scenario happens, you have to stay to the end to comprehend everything. And while I get some of these things may be difficult to hear, the woman who can comprehend this depth of male nature will be all the more powerful for it, especially with her own man in the future. So to truly understand what's happening within a man for this to happen, we have to address the dark side of men. And when I say the dark side of men, I don't mean the extreme behaviors. I'm not talking about those abusive behaviors. I'm talking about the dark side of men in regards to their vices. What is a vice? A vice is a behavior that someone does that pertains to them indulging in the dark side of who they are. And this is going to help you as a woman understand why men do certain things that may seem to be counterproductive to a long-term relationship, that a lot of the time end up hurting a woman directly or indirectly. And I promise you, when I say that if most men could change this about themselves, they would. So in order for you to understand, I need you to apply this concept to every human being. We all have a light wolf and a dark wolf inside of us. You, me, and every human being on this earth. Now, feeding the light wolf is doing positive things, doing favors for family, helping a lady cross the road, making the right decisions, being of service to others, telling the truth, doing things that are very much conducive to love and light. But we also have a dark wolf inside of us. This is where our self-serving desires come from, whether that's lust, money, status, drugs, attention, validation, recognition, manipulation. That's the dark wolf. And we all have both of these inside us. And our vice is food for our dark wolf. When we are indulging in our vice, that is us feeding the dark wolf inside of us. And this plays the biggest part as to why a man will cheat, but still have every intention to stay in the relationship. I think many of us make the mistake, and what people try to do is say, I am only ever going to feed the light wolf inside of me. And they try and make this promise. They try to make this promise to their partners. And the truth is, I don't believe for 90% of people, that is fully sustainable. In fact, I think what we're seeing is that it is not sustainable in an individualistic society, at least over a long period of time, let alone a lifetime. We think that if we don't feed that dark wolf inside of us, that if we starve the dark wolf that we have, that eventually it will just die of starvation. And that is the biggest mistake I believe we make, but in particular that men make. The dark wolf never dies, just like the light wolf never dies, because each of them are a part of us. And so what happens is when you try to starve the dark wolf for so long, it often comes back with a vengeance. And the vengeance is aggressive, it is destructive. The truth is, we might have to feed our dark wolf every now and then because it keeps it tamed and it keeps it at bay. And I believe that part of developing a good relationship with life, but especially with our partners, is figuring out how do you feed your dark wolf while mitigating as little damage as possible to others. Because the dark wolf does and will get hungry, and it will try to demand you to indulge in your vice. Now, I have noticed that for almost 99% of men that I've seen, that I've met, that we observe in the world, I've noticed that their vice tends to fall into one of these 5 categories: alcohol, gambling, drugs, fighting, or women. That's why, for example, when we go, oh, why does he always feel the need to go to the pub drinking with his friends all the time? That's him feeding his dark wolf. Or when we go, oh, he can't help himself but do a line of coke every weekend. That's him feeding his dark wolf. Or when we go, why is he always getting into fights? It seems like he almost enjoys hurting people and getting hurt. That's him feeding his dark wolf. You get the picture. Now, this is where a man staying in a relationship when he cheats comes in. Because if a man's vice, if a man's dark wolf food is women, i.e. indulging in lustful experiences with a variety of women, this means that him cheating isn't about the relationship, it's about him. The promise that men make is that they promise to never feed that dark wolf inside them again when they're used to feeding it. They promise to their wives, they promise to their girlfriends that they will never feed that dark wolf inside of them again. They will starve it and kill it. But as we recently established, we're finding that this isn't working for people because the dark wolf only dies when we die. And so what actually happens is while he promises and going along with this relationship, the dark wolf gets more hungry and more hungry and more hungry until it comes back with that vengeance. This is like when you hear the story of that guy who's been on the straight and narrow and squeaky clean for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And then suddenly he's in his late 40s and he just goes on a wild one. He buys that sports car he's always wanted to buy, but he never did because he had responsibilities. He starts meeting and even sleeping with different women irrespective of the women in his life. That is the dark wolf coming back with a vengeance. So how does this relate to a man cheating, yet him wanting to stay in the relationship instead of just leaving? Well, if the desire to have different women is a man's dark wolf food, that is going to be a consistent desire that he has. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not me saying that it is permissible for him to indulge in this. It's not. But I'm helping you understand from the shadow masculine perspective where it comes from. Now, what makes him actually decide to do it? What makes him take that step? Well, one, we know that men very easily separate emotions from sex. A man can have sex like a man goes to the gym, works up a sweat, he gets a release of those endorphins, and then he leaves without giving it a second thought. But also take into account, if you take a man whose vice is women and he's been trying to completely starve that side of himself, when that dark wolf comes back with a vengeance, he believes that he only has two options. He either A, ends the relationship, or B, he cheats on the woman praying she never finds out. That's what he sees as his two options to alleviate this burdensome desire in him. Now, here's the messed up and somewhat heartbreaking part. A man with very strong principles will leave the girlfriend he loves, will leave the relationship that he actually doesn't want to leave so he can alleviate that burdensome desire conscience-free. The man with ironclad morals would rather end the relationship with the woman he loves than cheat and lie to her. Now, I don't know which one's more difficult. Be with the person you love, but internally maybe you're suffering in silence, or end the internal suffering, but lose the person you love. And this is part of our evolution of the consciousness of relationships. Learning and knowing how to feed our dark wolf on a tofu diet that keeps it at bay, but also isn't a detriment to the ones that we love. And let's be real, women very much have a dark wolf side too. The typical vice or dark wolf food for many women nowadays, at least what I've noticed, is seeking attention, validation, emotional manipulation, bringing down other women they see as competition, whether that's to do with status or to do with men or to do with accolades. That's why some women have such a visceral reaction if they get into a relationship and her new man doesn't want her posting those sexy revealing photos on her socials anymore. Why is she so against it? Because the validation from posting that kind of content feeds her dark wolf. It's not that she's necessarily looking for other men, it's that has become her vice. So bringing it back to the guy in the relationship who doesn't end it but has sex elsewhere. Knowing sex can be little more than going to the gym for him. His thought process goes a little bit something like this. If me just having sex with one other girl means I can keep the dark wolf away and still maintain my relationship for however long, then maybe that's better than ending things. Some guys think like this and they would choose to do that. And I think the issue is they're not open enough with their girlfriends, partly because I think it's very difficult for women to understand this, let alone accept this. Now, here's the thing. I'm not saying you have to accept a man's vice, especially if it doesn't align with you and your values. But I am saying this to help you understand when you have a man who does cheat, but still wants to stay in the relationship. He doesn't cheat because he doesn't love his woman. He doesn't cheat because he wants his relationship to end. If he wanted it to end, he would end it. Part of a man perhaps cheating is because him keeping that dark wolf at bay, which has this insatiable desire for a variety of different physical partners. Now, I'll be honest with you, as part of my own journey as a man and my growth, when I was a younger adult, there were times when I ended things with a girl that I cared about because I didn't want to cheat on her. I didn't want to lie to her. I didn't want to deceive her. And I didn't want to be operating in secrecy, but I still cared about her. Did we have our own set of problems? Of course, like most relationships. But to be real, and maybe the realest part of this video, if I could have had a one-time hall pass to be physical with another woman and that was that at that time, I could have, and I probably would have, stayed in the relationship and worked on things. Could have been done. Working on it could have been an option for me. I remember calling my uncle after the breakup, and he was a bit of a playboy back in his youth, but now he'd been happily married for more than 20 years. He's got 2 gorgeous girls who, my cousins, all of it still going strong. And I asked him, hey, I just ended things with a girl that I care about because of this masculine desire. Does this ever go away as a man? You know what he said to me? He said it never really goes. And I was shocked. I said to him, but you've been married for almost 20 years. How have you managed this desire if it never quite goes away? And he said, it's kind of like losing a parent. The pain is always there, but it just gets easier. And especially when you have a higher purpose, more so when that includes people you love, like your wife, like children, like a family. Sure, there may be a bit of suffering there. It might be a bit of a burden, but burden is made for shoulders, not hips. And as men, this is what we do. And sitting on that and reflecting back on where I was at that time, I wasn't looking or in a place for children or a family. So that was probably the best choice for me at the time, but I wouldn't make that same decision now. And so if you're a woman watching this, and maybe you've been in a situation where your boyfriend has cheated on you and you don't know why, maybe you took him back, maybe you didn't take him back. I thought he was physical with someone else, but he told you he loves you, he sees his future with you, and it didn't mean anything and he wants this relationship. I understand the immediate feeling. Is you're thinking, the reason he did this is because I'm not enough for him. The reason he did this was because maybe he thinks I'm not good enough for him. And I really want you to let go of that burden, of that thinking that he did this because you were more than good enough. This has nothing to do with you and has everything to do with him. And so if you are ready to invite a great guy who has himself figured out, then enroll in my Claim Your Man program below where I show you how to do just that. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, keep it slick. Hey, Kit here. I want to invite you into the Kit Angels community. Don't know what that is? Have a look for yourself. It might be something you want.